Welcome back. Now, in a moment, we'll examine the terror group Al-Shabaab. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. Former South Korean President Park Geun-hye has pleaded not guilty at her trial for corruption. She's facing charges of bribery, abusing state power, and leaking state secrets. Greece may be denied the next instalment of its bailout funds after talks with Eurozone finance ministers broke down. Without the influx of cash, the country risks defaulting on its next debt repayment in July. And Brazil's President Michel Temer has U-turned on his attempts to halt an investigation into his conduct. Lawyers for the president now say they want the Supreme Court to proceed with an investigation into his potential obstruction of justice and corruption. The legal team believe the evidence against him is flawed and a thorough investigation will only clear his name. Now let's return to East Africa. Earlier in the programme, we looked at the issues surrounding the upcoming elections in Kenya. Well, security is one concern, driven primarily by the activities of terror group Al-Shabaab, who pose a risk across the Horn of Africa.
Al-Shabaab emerged in Somalia as a radical youth wing of the country's now defunct Union of Islamic Courts. The name means youth in Arabic. There are numerous reports of foreign fighters travelling from neighbouring countries, as well as the US and UK joining them. The group is thought to have up to 9,000 fighters, and in 2012 they pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda head Ayman al-Zawahri. Debating whether to switch to Daesh in 2014, the idea was rejected. Al-Shabaab have staged numerous attacks in neighbouring Kenya.
Well, still with us are David Anderson, the Professor of African History at the University of Warwick, and Ibrahim Nye from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. David, let's start with you, because despite any issues that there may be with Kenyatta over allegations of fraud and violence, he is seen as a vital ally by the West in the fight against Al-Shabaab, isn't he?
Indeed. I mean, Kenya has long been the most important ally that the West has in East Africa in the fight against Shabab. And especially since the Kenyans have gone into Somalia, it's become even more important. And there's no doubt at all that America and the West have to get behind Kenya and support them, both in dealing with Al-Shabaab domestically and in dealing with Al-Shabaab within Somalia. And despite recent information that suggests that Shabab might be in some way in decline, the indication in the last 3 or 4 weeks with attacks in Somalia and along the Kenyan borders at Mandera and Garissa County tend to indicate that that's far from the case.
Yeah, Ibrahim, David has a point there, hasn't he? Despite the fact that Al-Shabaab were said to be on the run in Somalia, actually their attacks on Kenyan soil have been well orchestrated and violent and large in scale.
Well, the attack on Kenyan soil, you have to understand that Kenya has a very huge Somali population, and they also host the highest number of refugees from Somalia. And so by the tactics Al-Shabaab is using now, it has been weakened militarily to some extent, but the menace that it poses to the stability of Kenya and even to Somalia is still very present. And so a regional effort, not just using Kenya as the ally, a regional effort that mobilizes all other countries around Somalia is very important and critical at this time to fighting Al-Shabaab. And Al-Shabaab also can be very threatening to the stability of the Kenyan election come August, because the use of violence or the sporadic attacks that they've been doing over the last few years could significantly sway the decisions of the vote or destabilize the electoral process.
And Kenya, of course, playing a key role in the fight against Al-Shabaab because it's part of the African Union force. Also been given a huge amount of money by the US militarily to combat Al-Shabaab.
Sure. And that role is important. But over the last 2 weeks, we know that there was a conference here on Somalia. But what the international community has missed is the role that Somalia itself has to play in its own national peace-building process and in the fight against Al-Shabaab. The government of national unity is formed. There is a government in Somalia, but the government has weaker hand. So the need to lift the arm embargo against Somalia is very critical at this point. If you will have Somalia to fight Al-Shabaab, you cannot just recognize the government. You have to recognize this government, strengthen this government, and empower this government to fight. Kenya cannot fight Al-Shabaab from outside. Yes, the role Kenya is playing is very critical, and they have supported the process of weakening Al-Shabaab, but Somalia has to take the lead, and this lead has to be taken from a position of strength, and that is what the current government in Somalia lacks.
Well, let me put that to David. Is there a feeling that more should be done to strengthen the government in Somalia? Somalia, of course, has had many years of problems, but it now has this recently elected national unity government. Should more be being done to allow the Somalian government to take more action against Al-Shabaab?
Well, Amazon have been told by the European Union that funding in the next year or so is going to be shifted towards supporting the development of the Somali National Defence Forces. This has serious implications for the future of Amazon, and it will be interesting to see how many of Amazon's African armies continue to want to serve if the European Union is not going to subsidise their activities. So I think there are serious questions around this. But I must also say, I think recently President Trump's intervention in this issue has not been entirely helpful. His declaration of war on Shabab, saying that the Americans would redouble their efforts, was very badly timed, coming a few weeks before Kenya's election and in the midst of a major drought in northern Kenya and southern Somalia. This has caused Shabab to react by focusing again on Kenya, when for a few months they paid rather less attention to their activities on the Kenyan border. But they see Trump's announcement as a declaration of war on them, and they see Kenya as the major protagonist of that war in alliance with the US. So Trump has brought some problems upon Kenya, I think, with this statement, which was provocative and has caused Shabab to react. And I'm not entirely sure that at the present time, either the American or the Kenyan forces are in a position to do much more than they have been doing already to affect Shabab's capacity to strike at them. And I rather fear that in the weeks leading up to the election in Kenya, we will see a number of fairly opportunistic Shabab attacks, especially in the borderland areas running from Lamu in the south up to Mandera in the north.
Yeah, and one of the problems with Al-Shabaab is that there is a problem of radicalization within Kenya. Poverty and drought, as David mentions, is one of those things which make groups like Al-Shabaab seem more attractive to disillusioned young men.
Yes, so the important thing there is to strengthen the states to build productive economies that will absorb young men, get them busy with jobs, and make them able to build families and give them education. Because Al-Shabaab and other terror groups are exploiting opportunities and gaps left by the state. For example, in Boko Haram have been able to convince the people that they can replace the Nigerian state in areas that they have failed. So Al-Shabaab and others are exploiting the opportunities left or the gaps left by the state. So strengthening the state, and this is a responsibility not really of the West, but of the Kenyan state, to reduce corruption, to expand economic opportunities for young people, and to ensure that they have activities to turn to. The rising unemployment at about 35% now in Kenya is an opportunity for a terror group like Al-Shabaab. And of course, they're going to exploit that. And this is a critical time that security has to be strengthened.
Something that has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for a fascinating discussion. Ibrahim Nye with me in the studio, and David Anderson at the University of Warwick. Now, we end with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. Now, twice a week, around 20 African asylum seekers in Hong Kong meet and train for the next friendly soccer match. All Black FC was set up by Medard Koya, a soccer coach from the Central African Republic, in the hope it would allow recent arrivals to assimilate into Hong Kong society. It's illegal to work or volunteer during an asylum application, and the lack of common language can leave many refugees disconnected from their new communities. The players hope that they can find their way into an established league. But for now, these monthly matches are making life in their adopted home country a little easier. And that's all for now. I'm Shuli Ghosh, and that was Insight. Shabab.